My golden child brother is demanding I let him propose at my wedding, and my grandmother is supporting him. After my grandmother threatened to make up rumors and expose me if I didn't let my brother propose at my wedding, I kind of froze. My grandmother is a narcissist and is exceptional at putting on a show to gain some sympathy. However, a brilliant idea popped into my head and I bluffed, telling her that I have been recording this call and have no problem playing it for everyone in the family to hear. She was the one that now froze, and ultimately she begged me to reconsider. Once again, I told her no and hung up on her. Side note, my grandmother has always sided with my brother and believed his lies no matter what he did, even buying him literally 5 times more presents during the holidays. Anyway, the next day, I ended up speaking with my brother again and threatened to tell his girlfriend if he was still intending to propose at my wedding without permission. He took it poorly and called me an awful person. So I pointed out that my wedding isn't about him. Actually, my parents had started siding with me by this point too, and our parents were there for this, and they backed me up. I think my brother did a double take when they did that. My dad pointed out that he'd raised my brother wrong, and that was on him. So from now on, my brother was to show them real respect, and they wanted to get an official lease drawn up for him to pay proper rent and utilities. He was only paying them $300 a month without contributing to any utilities or food, and if he doesn't want to pay, he can move out and they'll rent his room to someone else. My brother turned to our mom for help, but she just agreed with dad. He looked like he was having a conniption and then left the house. He came back a couple hours later but spoke to no one and locked himself in his room. 2 days later, my brother announced he was moving in with grandma because she invited him, and our parents basically told him that if he wants to live with her, then to go ahead. My brother responded to this by saying we all hate him for just wanting to propose to his girlfriend. My parents pointed out that it's not that he wanted to propose, but where he wanted to do it, and he'd get no support for it. He's refusing to talk to our parents now. My grandmother did try to call me again, but it ended up with me telling her that my brother will not be allowed to propose at my wedding, plain and simple, so he can get over it or not come. And the same goes for her. I ended up calling her out on her favoritism towards my brother since we were kids, which she tried to deny at first, but couldn't keep doing so because of how much I'd pointed out. She ended up crying again while I told her that if she keeps trying to insist on this, then she won't be coming to my wedding. She begged me not to rescind her invite, but still said she doesn't understand why I couldn't let my brother have his way before ending the call. My fiancé is 100% on my side and is fully ready to remove my brother and grandmother from the wedding. My grandmother hasn't called again, and she's not talking to my parents either. My guess is my brother went crying to her again to tell her mommy and daddy weren't enabling him anymore, so she offered for him to move in with her. But there's literally nothing she can do to sway me, and I think my last conversation with her made her realize that. I didn't wish to tell my brother's GF, but she called me up on a Saturday about whether my brother plans to propose to her during the wedding because he drunkenly babbled to her about his plan. I told her yes, this was true, and she ended up tearing my brother a new one, and he still tried to justify himself to her. That's when she told him they were through and cut all contact with him. My brother, of course, blamed me. He showed up at my place one more time to have a fit and said he is boycotting my wedding. He actually thought he had leverage that he and grandma won't go. I said I wouldn't miss him and that he's in his 30s now and needs to grow up. Our parents have cut the umbilical cord and are no longer supporting him, and they're already repainting his room to rent it to someone else. That made my brother just shut down and leave. Update. Well, my brother and grandma are officially uninvited from my upcoming wedding. My grandma called me again to berate me even more for refusing to let my brother propose. Apparently he's beside himself with grief over his ex. Yeah, so beside himself with grief that he's already on Tinder looking for a date, or so his social media says, which I pointed out to grandma. She claimed that was just his way of coping. I said I didn't care. He's no longer invited to my wedding because I can't trust that he won't do something crazy if he's there. Then she gave me her classic line of, I don't understand why. That's what she always says when I won't do something for my brother after he'd screwed me over. For example, I once gave my brother a loan back when he was still doing online college. He didn't want to repay it despite promising he would. Even after getting a good job, he hemmed and hawed about it when I wanted him to pay me back. He had the money, he just didn't want to give it up. So I said I was never going to loan him money again, and grandma gave her line of not understanding why. Even when I told her it was because I knew my brother would never want to repay me, so he's not going to get another penny. Her response was to say she still doesn't understand. So just hearing her say that about the issue of my brother being banned from my wedding made me lose it. I yelled at her that she does understand. She just acts like she doesn't because she doesn't want to. She's always been on my brother's side, no matter what he did, and because of that, she's no longer invited to my wedding either. And I don't care if she cries because I'm just plain done with her. She made her bed with the side she chose. Now she can live with it. Of course, she exploded in tears, crying like a sad whale, and called me a bad grandson. I said she was a bad grandma for thinking I'm the bad grandson when she always believed my brother's lies and played favorites. Everyone else knew it too. I then told her not to call me again, unless it was to admit the truth and give me a genuine apology. And then I ended the call. It went right back to radio silent from her. I also preemptively told my parents about what happened, and their response was that they don't care. I yelled at her anymore because she's never going to stop siding with my brother, no matter what. My parents are actually doing so much better since my brother moved out. They've got 2 rooms ready to rent out and on the market waiting for a tenant. My dad is also working on clearing out the attic to make another room up there for someone to rent. They're basically turning as many rooms in their house as they can into livable space. They're going to need that rent money to help pay off their debts, and they're still thanking me a lot lot for helping them with the money I've been sending monthly. My parents sat me down a while ago and apologized heavily for everything that went on from my childhood till now. They said they can offer no good excuse as to why my brother was the favorite when they shouldn't have been playing favorites at all, and that what they did was completely unacceptable. And the fact that I was still willing to help them out, even after everything they'd done, made them realize how horrible they were as parents. And from now on, they'll do their best to be better people. They've basically stopped caring about what my brother and grandma think too. They haven't been talking to them either. I've heard nothing from my brother's ex. She wants nothing more to do with my family, and I don't blame her. My fiancé is super happy about me standing my ground because she wanted my brother and grandmother out much sooner. Then she admitted something to me I never knew. Apparently, the few times she was alone with my grandma, she was told all sorts of lies about me that my fiancé never once believed. She couldn't recall much, but basically, grandma said a number of things that I remember my brother did that were pinned on me. But the gist of it is that my grandma was trying to tell my fiancé that I was a bad egg as a child, and that she better watch me closely in case she decided not to marry me. So, yeah, grandma was trying to poison the well with more lies. The fact that old hag was still lying to people like my fiancé when I'm not around infuriates me. So I'm beyond glad that I've cut the tumors that are my brother and grandmother out of my life. I don't need them anymore. Update 2. Well, my brother came pounding on my front door again a few days ago, and this time he was drunk. He vomited on my porch step and then did something I didn't see coming. He curled up on the ground crying. I figured he was gonna attack me or something because he was acting so deranged. But instead, he just got in a sort of fetal position and cried in the grass while blaming me for his problems in between swigs from the bottle he was carrying. He tried to get back with his ex and went over to see her to beg her, but she shut the door in his face. Afterwards, he pounded a bottle of vodka while walking over to my home since I only live a couple miles from my grandma's house. While he was sitting on the ground, he was drunkenly cussing at me and saying, "It's my fault that everyone but grandma hates him now." I had no sympathy and told him he did all that himself. Time to grow up and man up. He called me a few more things that I could barely understand and then pretty much stopped talking to just sit there and keep drinking and crying. I ended up taking away what was left of his bottle of vodka and said that maybe when he's sober, he can see some common sense. Then I called for a taxi to take him home. I wasn't about to drive to grandma's house because I don't want to see or be anywhere near her. My brother didn't even thank me for calling and paying for the taxi, just flopped himself into the back seat and told the driver to get going. I got a call the next day from the taxi service stating my brother had vomited multiple times all over the back seat in the short time he was in the cab, and it took $200 to thoroughly clean it because it was everywhere. I apologized and mailed them a check for their trouble. It's been a few days since that happened, but the crap didn't end there, so I'll be making another post very soon. Update 3. My grandma and my brother were already both uninvited from my upcoming wedding and borderline ghosted, but now she's gone and made a huge scene about it. She took my brother over to my parents' house and laid it on thick to my parents about how I'm treating her and my brother. Well, this next part I never expected. My mom, ever the passive doormat to her mother for as long as I can remember, finally lost it on grandma about how she's a narcissist and how her influence made her and my dad seem like ones too, and they were idiots to let that happen. Then they told grandma and my brother that the whole wanting to propose at my wedding thing was a completely stupid and selfish idea. Then my parents told them both to get out. My brother especially looked disheartened because he'd used them as a veritable ATM for years and barely contributed financially after landing a good job. Grandma, I'm told, left in hysterics, and my brother was silent most of the time. Grandma called me again to yell at me. I let her have her rant while my fiancé and I just let the phone sit on the coffee table while on speaker mode. After a while, Grandma realized I wasn't saying anything back and yelled at me to speak to her. But I told her that she's a coward who thinks she's in charge. But she's not and never will be. She can't boss me around, she has nothing to leverage over me, and she always acts like she doesn't understand my reasoning when I know she does. But she doesn't ever care to admit it. Then I called her out on the lies she spewed about me to my fiancé, which Grandma immediately denied. But then my fiancé spoke up and said she told me everything Grandma had said to her, then asked why she would do that. Did she not want me to be married and be happy or something? And that's when it came out. Grandma yelled that she was ticked. I am getting married before my brother. She'd wanted to see him married first because he's older and her favorite grandson, and she believed the least I could have done was let my brother try to save his relationship by proposing at my wedding. I said that wasn't trying to save a relationship. That was trying to trap that poor woman in one by hoping she wouldn't say no in front of a crowd. But I've already spoken to my brother's ex before she cut contact with all of us, and I know for certain she'd have said no to him anyway. I then asked her if the roles were reversed. Would she say the same thing to me? I then completely went off on her without responding. The words old hag, fossil, chocolate SpongeBob meme, an artifact, a narcissistic, self-absorbed ancient beach were used. Then all I could hear on the line was Grandma loudly sobbing and my brother trying to console her. He didn't say anything to me, and then the phone hung up, either by him or her. I don't know. Update 4. Well, my grandma went mental. Apparently, after I told her off over the phone about a month ago, she went off her rocker even further and actually lashed out at my brother, which is something I thought she'd never do with how much she loves and enables him. After about a week, a neighbor heard commotion in her house and ended up going to check on her, and she attacked the neighbor over it. Police were called and took Grandma into custody for a psych hold due to apparently how manic she was. My parents went in to see her, but visitors weren't permitted until the 3 days were over, and when they were, my my parents met with her and told me she was hamming it up playing the victim and trying to get my parents back on her side. My mother said Grandma was still blaming me and also saying that she still had a right to be at my wedding. Well, my mother let her have it by saying that she lost that right after everything she said and did. All the lies and gaslighting and being mad at me for something as petty as getting married before my man-child older brother that she outright said was her favorite grandson. Meanwhile, my brother was chilling in her house because he had it all to himself until my grandma was allowed to return home. Also, my wedding finally happened. The outdoor venue my wife and I picked was beautiful. There was a good-sized man-made pond with paddle boats and plenty of wild ducks and frogs, though the ducks came right up to people begging for food. We brought some loaves of bread so the kids in the family could toss some to the ducks. Yes, I did have security there, but no, she didn't actually show up. Instead, she was busy taking things out on my brother because apparently she has gone insane on him now. I know this because he sent me a letter since I have him blocked on everything but snail mail. I got the letter after coming back from my honeymoon. It was a letter with a mix of apologies and blaming me. He said he was sorry for wanting to propose at my wedding and sees how crumbly it would have been to try that, and that I was right about him being underhanded and trying to ask his ex to marry him in front of so many people, but then said he was angry. He didn't get to go to my wedding because I couldn't overlook his traumas. Then he said he was sorry for letting Grandma treat me the way she did for so long, because now he's getting some of that himself, then blamed me for getting Grandma so worked up in the first place over yelling at her and then not letting her into my wedding. Then went on to blame me for our parents kicking him out of their house and being stuck with Grandma because she's driving him up the wall. So now he's apartment hunting. He did apparently ask my parents to move back in with them, but they outright refused and told him to get his own place. And that's about it on that. Update 5. At first, my brother and grandmother only got worse. My grandmother turned into a crying whale again when my brother told her he was moving out. Then he had the gall to ask for mine and our parents' help to move his stuff because Grandma was saying she wouldn't let him leave. But our parents just reminded him of the shit he'd done to end up in his current situation, and rather than act like a rational human being, he decided he'd do just the opposite. He blamed me for ruining his life again, and my father told me he actually busted a gut laughing at my brother when he said that, then laid into my brother over how he was blaming his own crap on me, and my 30-year-old brother curled up in a chair crying. He refused to leave our parents' house that night and stayed curled up on the couch with a bottle of booze until the next day, in which he was kicked out by our parents with a raging hangover. Our father told him he needed to apologize to me face to face and that they'll no longer consider him their son if he doesn't. It took my brother a couple of days, but he showed up at my place with a piece of paper in hand and read out an apology he'd pre-written. He said he was so sorry for everything he's done. He's been a crappy person and an even crappier brother. He looked for any way he possibly could in his own head to make me the bad guy, but the excuses just aren't there anymore. He can't ever undo the things he did, but he wants to move forward and try to mend our relationship as siblings, starting with get out of Grandma's house. He told me he understands why none of us want to be there and that he'll hire help. We ended up shaking hands and having a hug, and thus far, he's actually been working hard to improve on himself, even cutting down on his drinking by a lot. As for my grandma, she did try to keep my brother from moving out, and she refused to let the movers he hired in. He had to get the help of a police officer to keep her at bay. They only had to move out one room's worth of stuff, and with the movers and my brother working at it, they got all of his stuff out of there in record time. My grandma ended up threatening to unalive herself while he was leaving, or so my brother said. But I'm pretty sure that was the exact truth because she did actually try, but in the most attention-seeking way possible. She took a bunch of meds and then called 911 on herself. They took her to the hospital and got her stomach pumped, which was a bit redundant as she'd thrown up before the ambulance even arrived, but they wanted to be sure. My parents ended up getting APS involved as Grandma ended up on another psyche hold, only this time in a hospital bed. During her stay, they did several tests on her because she avoided doctors for years, and she was found to be in bad health. Her kidney function was low, her lungs weren't in very good shape, and she was at heavy risk of diabetes, so Grandma had to be put in a care facility for her own health and safety. It actually didn't surprise me much. She was a little woman, but had some weight on her, and all her teeth had to come out when she was in her 50s, because the only thing she would drink is soda and she ate garbage. She also used to be a heavy smoker in her younger years, and I guess that did some lasting damage to her lungs. She'd been having breathing trouble for some time, but somehow hid it from us all. Doctors found that she needed to be put on oxygen, and that she can't live alone anymore. She wanted my brother to come back and become her full-time caregiver, but he refused and said that he just can't. He's got his own life to live, and he's got a lot to make up for with the rest of us. Well, my grandma went crazy crying and throwing things in the hospital while screaming at us all to all get out. After she was out of the hospital, my parents worked to have Grandma put in a care home. They moved a few of her personal belongings into a room there to try and make her more comfortable, but that didn't really do much of anything. She was there all of a week and said she was incredibly miserable. All the employees treated her like a child, and she had to have an oxygen breather attached to her at all times. She also said she hated being there because, in her words, the place was filled with old people, and she hated being reminded that she's old too and would rather be alone. She was there nearly a month before trying to unalive herself again by refusing to wear her oxygen breather and saying she'd hang herself with the tubes. They had to put her on close observation 24/7, which only made her even more miserable. Each time we saw her, she begged us, even begged me, to take her out of that place. She missed her home and she missed her old life, but she wasn't going anywhere because she was considered a danger to herself. Well, Well, eventually she just seemed to accept her fate that she would spend the rest of her life living in the care home, and my grandma pretty much just shut down. She became that bitter old woman that hardly talks to anyone. We paid her regular visits, but she was never happy to see us, me especially, and the months just blurred together with this routine. Things seemed to change a little when we told her my wife was pregnant, and she perked up at that. My wife reluctantly let her feel her belly when we visited, and that seemed to make her day. If anything, it made Grandma a bit nicer to all of us, but she was generally still her mean old self. Then some time ago, we found out Grandma passed away. The funeral was a bit lackluster. My mother was really the only one who cried. Most of us were just really quiet the whole time, and then we had a small family reunion at my parents' house. It was mostly just awkward conversations, as a lot of us didn't have much good to say about her, and she'd already passed away. So what good would it do any of us to talk about how toxic of a person she was in life either? So there wasn't much to do but stand around and get drunk. And get drunk we did. But it was more like a party full of sad, quiet drunks. Everyone dressed in black and gulping down beer or wine. Anytime someone wanted to do something fun, it just got really awkward till they shut up or decided to stay quiet or leave. And my wife wasn't there since she stayed home after the funeral because she couldn't drink and didn't want to be surrounded by people drinking. My brother is showing some genuine improvement. Grandma was his biggest enabler, and she's no longer with us. He applied for therapy last year to try and better understand himself and make a better effort to change. For now, he's trying to help out our father with remodeling the attic in his spare time. And things are still awkward between us anytime we see each other. Right now, I can't say how things will go in the long run at all, but without Grandma's toxic, hopefully everything will change for the better.